Joining us now is Colonel Daniel Davis, host of the Daniel Davis Deep Dive on YouTube. Highly recommend checking out that show because if you want to get accurate analysis of everything from our weapons stockpiles to military capacity and capability, or just even, games, war games that are taking place right now as we speak, Daniel Davis will break it all down for you. Colonel, thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely delighted to be here. Thanks for having me, Anna.
Of course, my pleasure. So let's actually begin with the report by the New York Times. It was released yesterday and it gave us an in-depth look into Iran's weapons stockpiles, also their access to, their missiles, the missiles along the Strait of Hormuz. They write that Iran has restored operational access to 30 of the 33 missile sites it maintains along the Strait of Hormuz, which could threaten American warships and oil tankers transiting the narrow waterway. Iran still fields about 70% of its mobile launchers across the country and has retained roughly 70% of its pre-war missile stockpile. That stockpile encompasses both ballistic missiles and a smaller supply of cruise missiles. Okay, so since I watch your show, I already knew that. Knew this. I mean, maybe not the specific percentages, but you have been talking about how much of our weaponry has been depleted and how much military capability Iran has. And we've been kind of lied to, not just by the president and the administration, but also members of the media who seem to just engage in their reporting as stenographers. They just regurgitate what the administration is saying. Yeah. But that's not really what's going on here. So can you first of all, help us understand how were you onto this before these fancy reporters were?
Yeah, because I pay attention to what the other side has to say, and I look at a broad spectrum of reports. See, you can never take anybody at face value, and I mean anybody in any of these major conflicts like this. But you have to listen to what they say. It's crucial to listen to what they say, and then you match that up with what you can validate on the ground. And so many times, some of the things that Iran has said have absolutely lined up on the ground, and sometimes what they said hasn't. And then other times, even the US, sometimes they actually tell the truth, but so you can't just dismiss everything, but you have to be very discerning. Well, there had been many reports over years that Iran for decades has been building these underground missile cities, and they have been providing video of it. It's not like it's a secret or you have to take anybody's word for it. They literally have panoramic shots underneath there of the video of the just cavernous miles and miles of these underground facilities. And you're talking everything from jet fighters to boats to, of course, to the missile launchers. The launch sites themselves are from inside the mountain in many cases. It is absolutely incredible, and Iran has been pointing this out. Anyone should have been able to understand that. It was definitely well known, and I've talked to some of the people on our intelligence communities that had access to this prior to the war and validated that it was told to the president that this is not going to work. And you talk about some of these underground cities, and now 30 and 33 by that report has been in, but there are also about 20 or 30 others scattered throughout the country, many of which haven't even been used yet. And to show how important, how tough they are, this report that literally just came out earlier today, I guess. It says that one of the Iran's underground facilities near Esfahan has been reportedly struck 20 times during the war, an average of once every 2 days during the first 40 days, using bunker busting munitions and precision strikes from B-2s. And according to the information, they are said to have had the site resumed operations within hours each time. So when you know that Iran has buried their capabilities because they have foreseen that they cannot go toe to toe with the US, they can't do conventional because they know that our missiles capabilities are profound, and our B-2s, our F-35s, F-16s, F-22s, you name it, they can all hit these things or fire long range from the JASSMs or from the cruise missiles, the ATACMS missiles from the ground, all kinds of ordnance that is really, really good and can hit pinpoint targets. So they know that, so they moved it underground so that when the war came, that they foresaw that they knew that they would be nearly impervious to our attack. So we should have known that. And so we should not have started a war we can't win, and then had this audacity, in my view, by especially from the president, Secretary Hegseth, and all kinds of these other folks who are supporting the war, to keep claiming, oh, we've destroyed 80% of their missiles, we've destroyed all of this, and they hardly have anything left. And it was never true. All this stuff they kept telling us over and over, Anna, was never true, and they knew it wasn't true. And now the media, and look, we dog the mainstream media a lot, but I mean, thank goodness that CNN, Washington Post, the New York Times, at least they're uncovering some of this stuff. So maybe there is some hope for the fourth estate. I'm grateful for anything they do that's good. This is one of the examples.
You know, I had a thought though today that made me worry a little bit about this reporting, or more importantly, the motivations behind this reporting. Because on one hand, there's been a lot of commentary. It could be inaccurate, but there's been a lot of speculation and commentary about how the Trump administration wants to get out of this war as soon as possible, but they want to spin it as a victory. And so Trump saying that he obliterated Iran's military is a way of spinning this as a victory so he can make an exit. I've never fully believed those arguments, mostly because the real decision maker over whether or not we exit the war, in my opinion, is Israel. And if the Israelis want us to continue, we're going to continue. That's how much influence I believe the Israelis have over our government and foreign policy. However, do you think there's a possibility that the reason why publications like the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times, which have, especially the Wall Street Journal's editorial board, I mean, they've been cheerleaders for this war. Do you think that they're trying to prevent Trump from exiting the war by saying, no, Iran is very dangerous. I mean, look at their military capability. Look at how much weapons they have, their missiles. We have to stay in it to ensure that they're no longer a threat. Do you think that's a possibility?
Yeah, unfortunately, you can't rule anything out on that. They could be trying that, but whether they intended it or not, they have validated that we should most definitely not resume the war, because that shows that 14,000 strikes that we had across Iran, that near virtually impervious to anything that their air defense, to anything that we had to launch. All it did was cause apparently a 30% degradation on some of the missile sites, and some weren't touched at all, and some were kept to be operational.
Do you know your brain rot index? No, of course you don't. I didn't either, because I didn't know what it was, but turns out you might want to, especially after hearing this. Did you know that the average American checks their phone over 200 times a day? That's about 5 hours of screen time a day on just your phone. Unfortunately, that means your brain is rotting. A little bit, but have no fear. I switched over to Noble Mobile, downloaded their Noble Mobile Life app, and was able to track my own brain rot index. It's 0. No, I'm just kidding. My number was not great, but now that I'm on Noble Mobile, getting way better. It tracks how much you use your phone, how often you pick it up, and even shows you how to save money on your phone bill by using it less. New members can even earn up to $100 cash back for keeping their brain rot index under 100, which means you are very unrot. Okay, so you unlock all that when you join. So download the Noble Mobile Life app today, track your own brain rot index, and learn how you can save money and spend more time doing things that actually bring you joy instead of doom scrolling on social media. Check it out by heading to tyt.com/switch or by downloading the Noble Mobile app. By the way, don't tell Andrew, but if you're on Wi-Fi, you also don't use your data, so you're gonna get money back anyway. tyt.com/switch.
So if that was their intent, then it should be backfired to anyone willing to use common sense, because that tells you we use somewhere around 30 to 40% of all of our remaining stockpiles of the most important missile systems we have. The JASSM's long-range cruise missiles, the Tomahawk cruise missiles, the THAAD long-range air defense systems, and the PAC-3 regular standard air defense missiles. We burned through huge portions of that and scratched the surface. That's about it. So you want to go back in and you want to get rid of that even further and diminish our capabilities and stockpiles there further, so that we're not even going to be able to be defending ourselves. Already, Anna, this has been a massive waste of our national security capabilities. Huge. Just think about that. Against a Midland power like Iran, we have burned through something like, and it's classified the exact number, but somewhere around 30 to 45% of everything we had of these key missile systems, offensive and defensive. Now, what's going to happen if we get into an unexpected war against somebody who's good, like a China, like a Russia, North Korea possibly, or even go back in against Iran, for crying out loud? We're going to burn through those and we're going to be nearly defenseless. So I think it's a major, major mistake that we started, and we should definitely not restart.
I mean, I totally agree with you on that. And when you consider the fact that, you know, the production of these THAAD missile interceptors, I mean, it takes a long time to produce them. It's also very expensive. And those are the missiles that are being used to shoot down Iran's incredibly cheap drones that are easy to produce, cheap to produce. So the drone component to this war also puts the United States at a significant disadvantage. Now, I want to talk a little bit about Secretary of Defense or War, depending on what you want to call him, Pete Hegseth, because he was testifying before Congress yesterday about the war against Iran. And you'll be shocked to hear that his conduct was unbecoming. I want to show you a quick example. Let's go to video 1.
You said just a few moments ago, Mr. Secretary, we control the strait. But it's clear that reopening the Strait of Hormuz for commercial traffic eludes us, in no small part because Iran retains a robust stockpile of cheap, lethal Shahed drones, and they are getting help from our adversaries in rebuilding them. What is your plan for reopening the Strait of Hormuz, Mr. Secretary?
I would just note that the majority of your question was highly disingenuous and loaded with suggestions that I very much don't agree with.
Your reaction, Colonel.
What do you? I could care less if you agree with it or not. We don't have control of the strait, and for a senator, and I think it was the Senate Armed Services Committee, to ask the Secretary of War, "What is your plan to get it open with?" is the most basic, elementary entry question. And for him to say, "Oh, I don't accept the premise of it," then what do you not accept? I mean, I'd actually missed that part there. But the fact is, it's closed, and it has been from the beginning, and it never was in the 47 years before we started this foolish war that should never have started. So it's a very valid question of what are you going to do to get it open? Now, I can tell you militarily, nothing. There's nothing we can do to force it open, which is because we tried everything under God's son to get it done the first time, whether that's all the naval power, carrier air power, the land-based power, these bunker busters, F-35s, F-16s, F-22s, A-10s, you name it. We tried everything. Nothing has succeeded, and nothing's going to succeed because there are so many different ways that Iran can keep that thing closed. It's actually not very hard to keep it closed for various reasons that we could get into if you want. But the bottom line is he doesn't have an answer, because the only answer to actually get it back open is the one that the president and the government hates more than anything. And that's to either agree to some kind of a negotiated terms that's acceptable to Iran, or you literally just walk away and pretend like there's a victory, like you said, which ironically is what I hope they do, because it's the least damaging of all the things they could do. But it's going to be one of those two things. It won't be the military.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. And what really set me off on yesterday's show, because we were showing these videos to the audience, was the clip that we're about to watch. So here's Hegseth saying the exact opposite of everything you just said. Take a look.
Oh, man.
Can you just confirm for the committee that there is not a military mechanism or means to reopen the strait?
There most certainly are military means by which we could open the strait. Both on targets on land and also with what we do with our naval capabilities, not to mention our naval blockade.
Why haven't you
done?
If that's true, and that's not what has been testified to us in private briefings, why haven't you done that already?
Ultimately, a preferred long-term approach would be a deal where they open it up.
Your own intelligence estimates, as has been reported, suggest that in fact, the Iranians are in a position to hold out for potentially years. This is a high-risk strategy to hope that this economic pressure will eventually cause them to voluntarily reopen the strait, when there's plenty of evidence from military history to show that countries that are being attacked or invaded or occupied are actually willing to put up with a whole lot of economic misery in order to preserve national pride.
Well aware, we understand all of those historical case studies, and it's not just economic pressure. There's military pressure, diplomatic pressure. We certainly have a lot more military pressure we can bring to bear if the president were to choose to do so.
I'd like your reaction to that, but also I want to talk about Hegseth's qualifications to even serve in this role. But start off with your reaction to what he said.
Yeah, well, first of all, you can tell he's stumbling over his words, trying to find something to say to just get away from the obvious answer, which the senator laid out there. There's no way you can answer it any other way than I can't open it up, or we would have. It's absurd to the highest degree to even try and claim, yeah, we could have opened it up militarily, but we chose not to because we wanted to find some other path, even though we went to war for 40 straight days, bombed 14,000 targets and did all this stuff that we did. But we stopped because, I don't know, we want to try other things. That's obviously absurd at face value. And for him to claim otherwise is just, it's lying. I don't think there's any other way you can put it.
So I remember when Trump named Hegseth as his defense secretary, and typical thing happened. The left was making a big deal about it in a negative way. The right was, cheerleading the idea. They loved it. And I looked at his record and I couldn't really understand how he was qualified to serve as defense secretary. And the reason why I say that is because, yes, I know that he was in the military, but serving in the military alone doesn't mean that you have the proper qualifications to make the right decisions when it comes to questions of war and peace. He was an anchor over at Fox. I'm guessing Trump likes the way he looks. But other than that, all we've seen from Hegseth, especially as it pertains to the war against Iran, is taking a bad situation and making it far worse with his ridiculous rhetoric that does not reflect well on the American people. That's my opinion, but I want to get your thoughts on it.
Yeah, when he first was listed, and then we started seeing a lot of these interviews where he's on television, and then during his confirmation hearing, et cetera, I'll be honest, I said, you know what? Let's give him a chance, because the last thing that we need is to somebody who's going to come in there and just be like Lloyd Austin, the guy before, that looks great on paper, coming in and out of industry, and all they do is just perpetuate the same things over and over. They just watch over this thing. They don't do anything to reform it, to bring it into the modern world. And I said, that's probably the last thing we need. Maybe we need a new guy who had 2 combat tours where he had a Bronze Star Medal for valor, which means that he knows what real combat is like. So I thought, okay, maybe if he understands how things work at the pointy end of the spear, and he at least has a field grade officer's understanding, maybe he can come in and do what he said. Because I said this at the time, if he does what he says in his hearing, then maybe he can do something good, which is to bring the warrior ethos back, to bring accountability back, to be doing modernizing the Department of Defense, et cetera. That's when it was still Department of Defense. And he didn't do any of those things. He came in and fired a bunch of people. You could tell he was just loving the job. Then he brings in this TV crew all the time, and does the makeup and all that kind of thing. And then one of the very first things he did was this whole Signalgate thing, and that's when I said, "Oh my God!" Now I felt foolish for saying give him a shot, because the very first thing he did is use a signal chat for operational planning, and it was self-evident. Everybody who's been in the military long enough to be a private or a second lieutenant knows that is absolutely forbidden, and you go to jail if you do operational stuff over a civilian app. Everybody knows that. And then he lied about it and said, well, it wasn't operational. And so that's when I said, all right, that I was fooled. And he has no character, and is not willing to admit when he made a mistake or do the right thing in the first place. And it just went downhill from that point.
So I want to end this portion of our conversation by showing you a video featuring Larry Kudlow, who's over at Fox Business now. He served in Trump's first administration. And he is absolutely shocked at the public opinion polling coming out of the US, showing that there is waning support toward Israel, and that the majority of Americans do not agree with this war against Iran. Here's how he reacted to it.
In terms of regime change, the president has said from the beginning he hopes the Iranian people will go and do that, will go and secure the freedoms they want. 42,000 of them lost their lives just for protesting the repression.
I call it, it's the worst.
It's inhumane.
It's Nazi-like. I'm sorry.
Saying
it just
since the Holocaust. Absolutely.
Since the Holocaust.
And we can't look the other way, because look at what happened then. So many leaders looked the other way. Trump's just not a guy who's going to look the other way.
How can a political party, How can a political party possibly oppose this? It is beyond. I know they do. The Democrats do. I don't understand. This is worse than 9/11 in a sense. It's not really worse than 9/11 because we lost almost 3,000 people. I don't want to go down that road. But everybody was united in defense and patriotism of the United States. It's gone now. How can that be? Iran is in some sense worse, bigger than Al-Qaeda. They haven't done us direct damage yet, but we're risking, Boston, New York, Chicago, you name it, that kind of thing. And how can people all of a sudden turn against Israel, a democracy?
I don't know if it was the 2-martini lunch talking or if he genuinely believes what he's saying, but I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Wow, that's another one I hadn't seen. So that was a bit of a shocker. I used some of his sound bites on my show, but I missed that one. And holy cow, that is as detached from reality as it can be. And one of the things that I suspect and fear is that he may believe what he said, meaning the sources of information he may get from wherever they are. He may think those things are true, and he may be genuinely puzzled why Americans who were attacked on 9/11 and had Washington, Pennsylvania, and the New York hit by an external source and all the damage that went with that, we don't have the same reaction when we go and search for an attack on somebody that did not attack us, was not threatening us, violating our own constitution, violating the War Powers Act and international law. Other than that, it was fine. And so why does he think anybody's gonna support that? And then to be puzzled why Israel people aren't supporting Israel when they have been on this mad genocidal episode from the beginning. And look, I said from the very beginning, from 10/7 and the days afterwards on Fox News, I said, listen, any country who's been attacked by a terrorist organization like that and killed, whatever it was, close to 1,000 civilians in the process, they're gonna strike back. We did, everybody would, and it's in the UN Charter. It's just normal humanity. But I said it matters how they do it. And then when it became evident with just days later that they were going to use this as an opportunity to go in and just start wantonly destroying the Gaza Strip and killing whoever was in the way, I said emphatically at the time, I said, this is putting Israel on a path that's going to be harmful and not going to provide their security. You can't put military force to something to get a political objective, providing security by creating more insecurity. And then of course that has impact when you just tens of thousands of people over and over were killed. And you can see, anyone can see that you are methodically leveling the entire living structure. There's no military utility in any of that. Even though they said it on a routine basis and we gave political and diplomatic cover to it, it was never true, and normal people can see that with greatest of ease. And so when he's surprised by that, then that means that he is either one, he's of that group of people that is okay with that kind of destruction, and that they value the Israeli people over the Palestinian people and say these other ones don't count, so it's fine if they kill them and force them off the land. Or he's just blind, or I don't know, maybe there's a third option, but I can't come up with anything that's rational.
Well, it's interesting that he made this partisan because there's a growing number of Republican voters, self-identified Republicans who don't agree with this war either, although the percentage is higher on the Democratic side, I will admit that. I think that this behavior and the reaction by normal Americans to the behavior of Israel has been very clarifying for me personally, because I did used to see everything in our country through a hyper-partisan lens. And when you do that, you inevitably start convincing yourself that the other side is dangerous and they want terrible things and they don't value human lives. I am actually, the one silver lining to everything that's been going on is it woke me up to the reality that most Americans are good people. Doesn't matter if you're a conservative, a liberal, a leftist, doesn't matter. If you see what's happening in the Middle East, you see the loss of innocent human lives, you see the treachery being carried out, and you speak out against it, you have a problem with it, it means you're genuinely a decent person. And knowing that the majority of my fellow Americans are decent people who see that slaughter abroad and they have a huge problem with it, gives me a little bit of peace of mind. I think that we as Americans will pull through the horrible situation that we're in right now. But we have to have that optimism about who Americans are as people. I'm not talking about people in positions of power, just normal Americans. And seeing them react negatively to what's happening in the Middle East gives me a little bit of hope. Anyway, let's move on to Ukraine. So we haven't talked about Ukraine on TYT for a while now, and that's very much on purpose because some number of months ago, I realized there were certain things that weren't being reported in the US. There were certain things I myself might have been naive about, and I wanted to get to the bottom of the truth and feel comfortable, making a case. I am still not there, Colonel. I don't feel confident in what I know about what actually happened in the lead up to the Russian invasion into Ukraine, which is why I'm bringing you on, because you've been following this very closely, and I want to get your perspective on it. So let me introduce you again so people know who you are. So joining us is Colonel Daniel Davis. He's the host of the Daniel Davis Deep Dive program on YouTube. And I wanted to ask the Colonel some questions about what the latest news is out of Ukraine. But more importantly, I wanted to offer a different perspective than what you've heard on this show in regard to the lead up to the Russian invasion into Ukraine. So let's actually start off with the most recent news. So where are we, Colonel, today when it comes to the Russia-Ukraine war? There's supposed to be a ceasefire, but the New York Times reported just today that 4 Ukrainian civilians were killed on Tuesday and 8 more died in strikes early Wednesday. The fighting on the front carried on without having paused at all during the ostensible ceasefire. And the whole point of this piece was to make, draw some attention to the fact that the conventional meaning of ceasefire has been upended during the Trump administration, because even when there clearly isn't a ceasefire, it's being referred to as one. Nonetheless, what is the latest news?
This ceasefire, it's important to identify exactly what it was. It was supposed to be a 3-day ceasefire for the purpose of the May 9th Victory Day in Russia, and the same, I forget what they call it, something close to the same thing in Ukraine, because they were all part of the Soviet Union that won World War II, what they call the Great Patriotic War. And so President Putin tried to get one of those last year, and it ended up not working. They kind of had a unilateral ceasefire, and it kind of held a little bit, and then they went back to fighting. So there was never any anticipation this would do anything more than just the 3 days, the day before, the day of, and the day after that May 9th day. So it was always expected as soon as that period ran out that they would turn back on. It generally held at the strategic level because the Russians, I think within 3 hours of the end of that ceasefire period, started what turned out to be a number of waves, and I think 800 drones and missiles ended up being fired from Russia back into Ukraine. And Ukraine did the same thing on a smaller scale, but pretty robust into Russia. So, and then as you pointed out on the front lines, when you're talking about a 700-mile front line, there's gonna be some skirmishes and there's gonna be some breaking, but nothing big involved because there hasn't been any big tactical movements for a few months now, actually. So in that regard, a lot of fire was exchanged back and forth across the line, but nothing of any real significance. So that's kind of where we are right now in terms of what's happened in the last few days.
Interesting. So you mentioned that there hasn't been any major, military operations over the last few months. Like, where is this headed? I mean, is this a quagmire, or is there any movement on the Russian side to maybe put an end to this?
Yeah, there has been, and it hasn't gotten any media coverage at all here. And I've been really surprised because a lot of the stuff is open on the Russian side. I talked a minute ago about in the Iran war, you got to listen to the Iranian side and the American side and the Israeli side to try to figure out what's actually going on. Same thing here. You got to listen to the Ukrainian side, but you also have to listen to the Russian side. And the Russians are furious at Putin, and they have been growing up for a number of months now because he hasn't been pushing hard enough. Because when this came to we crossed over the 4-year mark here not too long ago in February, and that eventually exceeded the period that the Russians were in World War II. And a lot of them were going, hey, hang on a minute. Our greatest generation won our war in whatever the total number of days was, 1,300, something like that. And they said, now then here we are, we've passed that against one country, not against the whole Nazi empire. why can we not win this? And why aren't you trying harder? And Putin is very risk averse, so he hasn't been wanting to push hard. But now that he's starting to take pressure, even at the troop level, I've gotten some sources who have direct connection to people at the front line, and then others at the strategic level, and they're all getting angry at Putin, and it's starting to become public. So that's putting pressure on him to do something different and to take more of a risk. And now then there's a guy named Karaganov who came out along with a couple of others, has been saying, you know what? It's time to change the dynamics here. We have been, it's just Russia against Ukraine on the ground, but it's Russia against 50 nations from the United States and all the European nations and a bunch of others from Asia, et cetera. And they say, we're tired of this. It's not just one-on-one, it's 1-on-50. And it's time for us to change the dynamic and start firing missiles into European cities, into European military facilities that are supporting us against this. And they said if that doesn't deter them from stopping any further, then we need to escalate to tactical nuclear weapons. They're saying this out loud, and it's not getting any kind of coverage. I had John Mearsheimer on my show this afternoon, and we talked about this extensively and showed some of the video from it. There's been another one since that time I found on Russian media, and they are getting very serious about this. And I'm just really alarmed that we haven't been paying any attention.
So I have a friend named Greg who he's been just nudging me to cover this. And I have to be honest with you, part of me felt like maybe he's being a little bit hysterical because he really believes that pretty soon Europe is going to engage in a kinetic war with Russia, and it could lead to the use of nuclear weapons. And he's like, Anna, you got to dig deeper. You got to dig deeper. But based on what you're telling me, there's a likelihood that that could happen, but Russia would be the one taking the first, carrying out the first strikes.
What the Russians are saying in this Karaganov is his name, has been saying this for literally a long time. He was an early proponent of this, but he was a kind of a fringe guy. But now that because it's dragged on so long, it's moved into the mainstream, and a lot of people are saying, yeah, we think this is going to be the case. It's been fed by, really all the way through, and it's continued on from the European leaders very foolishly continuing to threaten Russia. And they have moved German troops into the Baltics, for example. They keep talking over and over about we have to have this rebuild Europe, and we have to have this $800 billion advancement, and we have to get ready to fight Russia by 2030 or 2029 even. So they're all trying to grow their forces. They're saying let's all add 5% of GDP. Let's go up to a wartime footing. So the Russians are hearing all that, and they're thinking, well, we're not just gonna be sitting on our hands and doing nothing, especially when we're just nibbling at the front lines here. So that's why they're saying we got to do something different. And so they're saying instead of all these 50 countries supporting the killing of Russian troops on our front lines, how about we take the fight to them for the first time? Because they say we're already effectively at war. How about we make them pay some of the price too, and not just our side? And that's the danger that we keep talking on the Western side about all this coming war with Russia, and now then they're starting to believe it, and now then they may be ready to take some action on it. Now it all goes down to President Putin. How much risk is he willing to take, and how much pressure can he resist on the inside? Because they may strike military targets in Europe, and of course that's an Article 5 trigger right there that's going to definitely trigger that. But how much appetite is there going to be from our weakened military, Anna? Because we have spent 4 years emptying out our arsenals to give them to Ukraine to go and try to kill Russians. But now we don't have the industrial capacity to replace that. So we're now in a very weakened position, while Russia is the opposite. They are now busting at the seams with all kinds of missiles and drones, artillery shells, everything you need to fight a modern war. They have been stockpiling this stuff while they're fighting here. We can't fight a conventional war, or God forbid, a nuclear strike. We just can't do it, or it could be destroying of everybody. But Russia is feeling like they're in the increasing powerful position because they've been preparing for it and mentally, whereas all we do is talk a lot of stuff and then deplete our arsenal. So it's a bad situation.
Okay, so the underlying disagreement, the big debate, is what the intentions of Vladimir Putin is, what the Russians want to accomplish, right? So if you speak to anyone in the Western world, they are absolutely convinced that the whole point of all of this is to rebuild Soviet Russia, not in terms of communism, but in terms of the land grabs
Empire,
and the expansion, the empire. Yeah. So that's what the Europeans believe. That's what the United States believes. Russia, on the other hand, has consistently made the argument that the reason why this happened is because of the security risk or threat to Russia imposed by NATO. What is the truth? What is the reality?
Yeah, this stuff that they're trying to rebuild the Soviet Union and trying to get ready to advance on the ground towards the West is complete fiction that we created. This goes back to 2007. 2007 at the Munich Security Conference when Putin was first invited for the first time because they were trying to, this was in the euphoria, the short-lived euphoria after the end of the Cold War. And we said, hey, let's have a European-wide security architecture. And so Putin was invited to Munich to have a conversation. And he said, listen, about this NATO expansion. And he said something which, and I've written on this extensively before the war started. I said, listen, what sense does it make for, I think it was 16 members of NATO to stand against this totality of the USSR and the Warsaw Pact countries in like 50,000 tanks, and I forget how many tens of thousands of missiles and planes and all that. And we stood up against them and we stared them down during the Cold War, and then they ended up falling. Now, what sense does it make once they disintegrate that we need to expand that NATO? If 16 stopped all of that and now that they've disintegrated, you don't even need it anymore, much less to expand it. But it's like we took advantage of that, and it wasn't collective security anymore. It was advancement and to keep Russia down. And then it kept going on and on. And so in 2007, Putin said, hey, who is this expansion directed against? Because you say it's not us, but there's nobody else out there. It's only us. And if you keep going, there's going to be a problem. In 2008, then NATO took a step that says, as a matter of fact, it's not just the Baltic countries and these others. We're going to expand into Georgia and to Ukraine. And Russia says, no, you're not, because it's one thing for the Baltics, which we don't like, but that's militarily defensible for us. There's a lot of reasons why that's not that hard of a task to defend. But Ukraine, that's like right down the plains that has a path leading straight to Moscow that twice Western powers, Napoleon and then Hitler, used to invade Russia in the past. And so they say, no, that's not happening. If you do that, and this was eventually told to Jens Stoltenberg, the former NATO Secretary General, if you put NATO into Ukraine, there will be war. But if you just take that off the table, there won't be any war. And Jens Stoltenberg mocked it and said, nobody tells us what to do. They will come in. And then Putin said, then you're going to have war, because there's no way in God's earth we're going to let your military alliance come up to our border like it's happened twice in the previous 2 centuries, like we would do, Anna. There's no way on God's earth we would ever allow China or Russia to move into a military alliance with Canada or with Mexico or Cuba, for example. We would never allow any of that. Or Venezuela, which you've seen us. So.
I mean, we think, and when I say we, I mean our government thinks that chance, just simple chance against America means that there's a security risk and we should go to war against people chanting that in a foreign country that doesn't even have weapons that can reach mainland United States. But I totally agree with you in regard to how the US would react very similarly, if not even more aggressively, if a similar, alliance had reached our borders and threatened our security. Can you talk a little bit though about Crimea? Because the counter argument to what you just said is, well, Russia annexed Crimea in 2014. How do you justify that? Like, what was that about?
Nearly everything that I've described here from 2007 forward, actually everything, we initiated first, Russia reacts. We want this situation, we love it to where we can do whatever we want and you can do nothing about it except for say, yes, sir, and just suck it down. That's the case here. In 2014, in late 2013, early 2014, you had Ukraine whole, to include Crimea. Now, Russia had a military base. It's this place called Sevastopol on the Black Sea at the bottom of Crimea, which was part of Ukrainian territory, and they had for a long time since the 1990s when Ukraine became independent from the USSR. They had a deal that there would be like a 99-year lease for the Russian Black Sea Fleet there. That was something they all agreed to. Everything's fine, good to go. Well, now all of a sudden, with this, one of the reasons why Russia said they're not going to allow NATO into Ukraine, because that's where their base is in what then was Ukrainian territory. And then now all of a sudden here we have the big Maidan of late 2013, early 2014, when we, and everybody knows now, we helped orchestrate a coup that overthrew the legally elected government that was leaning towards Moscow. We didn't like that. We wanted one that was leaning towards Europe. And so when the guy who was in charge, I think it was Yanukovych, was leaning towards Russia, then we said, yeah, we can't do that. So there was a protest, and instead of putting the protest down, we allowed the protesters to run this government out. But because then there was a legend, this is part of the gray part. There was then it turned violent in the capital city, and there was some claims that it was the Russian-dominated government was killing protesters, and others said no, this was actually infiltrators in the crowd to actually shoot the crowd to create more chaos, to make it look like that it was the government, so that they could come and drive them out, etc. That's in the gray zone. What's not in the gray zone is that Russia, EU, and Ukrainian authorities got together on I want to say it was the 20th of March, I'm sorry, 20th of February, not 2014, and they came up with a solution. They said, all right, tell you what, we'll have early elections. Russia agreed to this, and they said in May. So from February to May, we'll have early elections, and if your guy wins, then your guy wins. We'll have early elections. And Russia said they knew that they would lose the election because the sentiment had turned against them. But instead of allowing that to happen, we supported the crowd running the Yanukovych out, and then they just took power. And of course, you may be familiar with what's her face, Victoria Nuland, with that famous intercepted phone where we're deciding who's going to be the next leader of Ukraine, and we're talking about all these different people. We put our handpicked person in there because we didn't want there to be an election. We just wanted to choose who was in charge. In response, Putin said, okay, then I see how this is going. We agreed to elections. We aren't going to agree to a coup, and we're now going to take Crimea, which is 95% ethnic Russian anyway. So it was in reaction to what we had helped facilitate inside of Ukraine. That's where that came from.
I could talk to you about this for the rest of the show, but unfortunately we're gonna have to wrap up soon. But I have one more question for you that I think is important, and this is something that I myself was naive about and wasn't fully informed about. Talk to me about how ethnic Russians had been treated in Ukraine under Zelensky.
Yeah, I mean, there was one of the most infamous was during this Maidan period when it expanded out from the capital later in 2014. It got down into Odessa, and there was a number of pro-Russian folks there, a lot of ethnic Russians, because of course, during the Soviet Union, you had all kinds of ethnic Russians and Ukrainians. They were mixed all over the place. There's a lot of history that I won't bore you with right now that imported a lot of different Russians in over the decades prior. But the people, the pro-Ukrainian people that were the pro-neo-Nazi folks turned against a lot of the ethnic Russian people, and they ended up burning them alive in a building. I can't remember what the building was, but it was just a horrific scene. It's on, people can Google it. It's still on YouTube, where they surrounded all the people, these pro-Ukrainian folks, and then they barricaded them in there, and they set the building on it and burned them all to death. And wow. That's been one of the worst things in the Russian end. But that's the thing. They said, you're going to outlaw the Russian language. You're going to outlaw their ethnic religion. I mean, all these kinds of things. So they kept pushing them down so that they made them not equal citizens in their own country. I'm talking that were people that were citizens of Ukraine from Russian ethnic heritage.
It's incredible. And honestly, whether you're talking about the Victoria Nuland phone call, whether you're talking about the way ethnic Russians had been treated in Ukraine, this is the kind of stuff that we're not really getting in-depth reporting about from certainly not legacy media. I'm sure there's independent media that has been covering it, but their coverage tends to get buried. But Colonel, thank you so much for taking the time to explain this to me and to our audience. I think the story is a lot more complicated than the very clean narratives that we've been seeing in places like the Washington Post or the New York Times. So I appreciate you. By the way,
I don't want to give you the impression that the Russians are clean. They're not. I mean, there's a lot of plenty of bad things going on all over the place. Bottom line is nobody's hands are clean. This is just two sides that are using a lot of difficult tasks, especially. But the Ukraine side is not this innocent side. That is important to say.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's a lot more complicated, again, than what we've been led to believe. So anyway, thank you again, Colonel Daniel Davis, host of the Daniel Davis Deep Dive on YouTube. Everyone, please check it out. Please subscribe. And thank you for being so generous with your time, Colonel.
Always my pleasure. Thanks, Anna.
Every time you ring the bell below, an angel gets his wings. Totally not true, but it does keep you updated on our live shows.